Get started. Welcome, everyone. John Taylor is joining again today. Your topics are always so fascinating, and they go off in different directions, and you use visual analogies that have stuck with me. And so I'm always excited, when we get to be on a webinar together because I always learn something. So no pressure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
none felt. Today, actually, so I noticed as soon as Tammy made me a panelist, I noticed there's already a Q&A question, and me and anonymous attendee must be on the same brainwave because this is totally what we're talking about today.
Oh, funny. I didn't even read it
Um,
yet. So,
yeah, we're going to talk topically, principally about approach versus avoidance in the healing of trauma, distrust, annoyance, all that kind of stuff. And why I think a collaborative approach to what we are going to step towards and tackle and what we are going to stay away from is a very, very important relationship skill. Um, so Tammy, I think I want to start with reading the question so that we
okay.
start with a practical application and then I'll go
Yeah,
through.
makes sense. So the question is, my husband has struggled with sex addiction and has been seeing a CSAT for about a year and a half. However, they have not addressed what a healthy sexual relationship looks like moving forward. How does someone in recovery rebuild a healthy relationship with sex? And is it a red flag that this has not been addressed yet? He often says, whatever you feel comfortable with based on therapy and support groups. Is that the right approach?
Yeah, so let's think about this through the lens of approach versus avoidance to deal with something that is, I'm just going to say for a lot of couples where there's been sexual betrayal, healthy sexual relationship, like it's a minefield. There's a lot of risk there. I mean, there was risk there before there was discovery of betrayal because sex and intimacy are very vulnerable. But so early on in relationships, I think a lot of our recovery is ultimately non-nuanced. It's shortcutty. And that's not necessarily because that's how it's being presented to us. Remember, the brain under stress can't handle complexity, even how we interpret complex ideas. So early on in recovery, when I'm trying to talk emotional nuance to couples and individuals, like I might as well be trying to paint the sky orange. Like it doesn't land. And it's not the fault of the people in front of me. It's their brains are stressed with, are we going to stay together? If we break up, do we have enough money to live separate lives? Am I ultimately safe with this person? Am I going to get hurt again? Are they going to spill the beans in every secret that I have? So early on in recovery, we have kind of this black or white, good or bad view of things, and there's not a lot of nuance to our approach to things. And we take trauma and struggle as something that we can do nothing about. It's not our fault. In fact, for most of us, when we get into recovery, we start hearing things like, yeah, that wasn't your fault, you were abused, or that wasn't your fault, that was your partner's choices. Or, you know what, you are not the you're not the one who's in charge of the intensity of your partner's anger. Yeah, you did really, really awful things, but the degree to which they're getting angry, what they're getting themselves licensed to do, like that has to do with them. Um, some of us are new to that idea, and early on, that can be very empowering and it can lift some burdens. Okay, that guilt and that shame I carry around, maybe I could reevaluate that sense of responsibility, and I've got to be perfect. Maybe I could reevaluate and I could start to see, the world doesn't rest on my shoulders. The gate doesn't swing on me as a hinge. Like, um, I think most disempowering though is when we grab onto that or we don't grow that view up and we start to think long term about there's nothing I can do about this. I have no agency. It's not my fault. Or I would say most disempowering, it's somebody else's fault. And pretty soon that's not my problem can get translated into I'm waiting for you to do something about this. Now, think about that if you're at a party and you're resting your hand on a cool stovetop and somebody comes along and they turn the burner on and it gets real hot real quick and your hand gets burned. Imagine keeping your hand there and saying, listen, you turn this stovetop on. That's not my problem. There's nothing I can do about this. I'm waiting for you to fix this. It's lunacy, right? Like we would jerk our hand away. It's actually reflexive. We would jerk our hand away. Um, I think some of that same line gets followed in situations having to do with all the trauma and all the triggers around betrayal, both for folks who have been betrayed and for folks who have been compulsive. So, with that image in mind, think about what is it doing for you to keep your hand on the hot burner and saying, gosh, this really, really hurts. There's nothing I can do about it. I didn't turn the burner on. It was safe when I got here. You mess this up, you fix it. So hold that image for a while. Now let's go back to what trauma is in the nervous system. And this is a way like one sentence view. So essentially the problem with traumatic memory and traumatic sensation in the nervous system is the duration of the sensation. That's the source of distress. Because if you think about that window of tolerance, we get stuck on in overactivation or we get stuck off in underactivation. And so instead of the normal kind of up and down that our nervous system can do, that initial like, oh, that's getting warm, I'm going to pull my hand away, now I'm okay. In traumatic situations or with trauma in the background, this could happen again. It caught me off guard the first time. I'm not safe. That sense of hypervigilance and response doesn't start to wane once the problem is dealt with, or whether or not the problem actually exists. So I would call it an adaptation in your body. If something so horrendous happened that you didn't catch in the first place, you're going to get hypervigilant whether you need to be or not, because your body's trying to learn and say, we're not going to let that happen again. Another part of trauma in the nervous system, it's a combination of memory and sensation, though often it can be sensation only and not accompanied with any specific memory. Remember that depersonalization or compartmentalizing is an adaptation. It's an attempt to keep the brain and body from getting overwhelmed. So, from a neurological position, trauma is tricky. And it also requires some things that are counterintuitive to be able to heal and to be free from it in the long run. So, let's just take those one at a time. The duration, the stuck on or stuck off. Again, if your faucet in your kitchen, we've actually had this before with kids who like to play in the bathroom sink. A couple months ago, my daughter caught on that there's an emergency drain in the front of the bathroom sink, and she plugged it because she didn't want the water to go out of the sink. And she left it on to fill up and decided to go do something else. And we had a nice little flood to deal with. Um, that same sink, coincidentally, when I tried to replace the faucet a while ago, the knobs, we live in a very old house, the shut-off valves actually did not shut the water off. So I opened a pipe and water was flowing. It was stuck on. And so I had to run down to the water main shut off in the house and shut off the whole thing. Now, again, in other places in our life where something is stuck on or stuck off, there can be this adaptive part of us that says, there's a part of me that's like, no, I have to stay in the bathroom. Water's going everywhere. It's like, no, no, I have to leave this. I have to go deal with it at the source. Yes, there's a big mess, but this is the best way to deal with it. So that idea of approaching, or even something that feels really threatening, this is a fight that I want to have, or I'm not going to let you get another one over on me. You know, think family of origin. Think about a spouse who has no interest in anything fair, mutually protective, secure functioning. There can be this stuck on in the approach. Nope, I'm going to have this argument with you again and again and again, versus realizing it gets me nowhere. It does nothing. So it doesn't feel great to say, I'm not talking to you about this anymore. You can think whatever you want, but that might actually be best for me. Now, the combination of memory and sensation, let's take that with what's counterintuitive. Um, I don't know about you, but sensation in my body that doesn't follow a storyline that I can't track, it freaks me out. So earlier this week, I had a little 24-hour flu bug, fever, all that kind of stuff. About 10 days ago, I was backpacking in Escalante, Utah, and I was going with a friend. And I didn't know this, but untreated water that carries Giardia, you won't notice symptoms for about 10 days. Now, I didn't know this, and I don't even know what the symptoms of Giardia are. So my body starts kind of freaking out the other day. And I immediately start depending on like, oh, I probably had some water that wasn't clean. Great, now I have giardia. So this sensation without memory, we are programmed to make sense and meaning in a story out of everything. Sometimes what we need to do to navigate the trigger is let go of the narrative. I know there's a million things we could do about this, but just stay with your body. Or there are some times where the narrative is really tied. I'm working with a couple right now where there's some good healing going on, but the partner who's been betrayed is really, really struggling with my partner actually did this stuff. And it's not like places he went and did this stuff, it's not like they've been wiped off the map. Like they're just there, they're all over the place. Um, and the memory says this is what he did when he was left to his own devices. And it's saying, don't leave him to his own devices. And then she said, I hate that for me. I don't want to do that, but then I'm screwed because all I can do is trust him. So you notice how there is a memory, an explicit memory. It's a one-to-one. It matters here. But we're never going to get over the trigger. We're never going to negotiate that paradox if there's not a come into the present moment. Let's deal with what's going on. So, from a nervous system perspective, this isn't just therapists trying to be annoying. From a nervous system perspective, often the long term healing of trauma requires us to do that which we do not feel like doing, and it doesn't make sense. Now, large picture approach and avoidance. So I would put dealing with trauma, triggers, emotions. I would put the strategies in two buckets. Is it an approach strategy or is it an avoidance strategy? Now, avoidance can be a four-letter word in recovery communities. I'm not treating it like that. It's legitimate. We've talked about some legitimate applications of that. But let's just talk about what you get from avoidance and what you do not get from avoidance. Spoiler, in the end, I'm going to say I think you need to be well versed in both approach and avoidance if you want good long term healing and you want an ultimate feeling of empowerment and self efficacy. So, avoidance of trauma, and I would also add to that annoyance, distress, and discomfort. Because there comes a time in relational healing where your partner's tendency to do this or that may have nothing to do with whether they're addicted or not or whether their recovery is good. They might just be an annoying person. And so you might have to speak up and say things like, we have shelves for shoes in the mudroom. Quit leaving your shoes in the mudroom. Versus what I hear a lot of people say with stuff like that is, well, I've told them 50 times and they're not doing it. Does that mean that they just don't like women or they don't care about me or they're wrapped up in their own world? Uh, Possibly. They also just might be a bad roommate. Um, so avoidance, it immediately stops the building sensation. This is like taking your hand off the hot stove. There might be some pain to deal with, but avoidance, when we run away from a predator, when we close our eyes for the thing that's concerning to us, it stops new input, which can be a lifesaver in moments where we're starting to get overwhelmed. It gives the sense of safety because there's removal of the immediate overwhelming threat. I would add to that, there's the perception of the removal of the immediate overwhelming threat. Because often I'll see people who have practiced avoidance only get really frustrated and say, well, I do my best to avoid this, but it keeps happening. Like, why is my spouse, my children, the world, my family against me? And it may be like, well, avoidance gets you so far. What if we worked on some approach stuff to help you with this? So it aligns with energy preservation and the minimization of threat, which can feel really good when, again, we're getting stuck on. I don't have a lot of headroom. But ultimately, it's a cul-de-sac. There's not really a next step after avoidance. It's about, I ran away from the lion. Now I'm not going to get eaten. And that's what's most important. And again, there are some situations where the ultimate, like, I'm far away from that. It can't hurt me. It is the best long term thing that can happen. There's other situations where it might be really, really frustrating to live in a cul de sac, like when it snows a lot and the plows come by and the plow blade pushes a big wall of snow up in front of your cul-de-sac and there's not an alternative road to get out. You're at the mercy of whoever's going to come along and clear your one road. Sometimes a cul-de-sac is the best place to live, but you have to be choosing it. You can't default to it out of fear. And that has to be, I would not recommend avoidance as like, well, I'm just an avoidant person or I'm an anxious person. So I have to avoid. I think that's immature. I think that's underdeveloped. I think it's not coming from an empowered place. So you can decide on some things. It is best for me if I just don't do this thing. You know, some addicts who have struggled with pornography for a long, long time, and they say, I just don't have the internet in my pocket. I just don't do it. Or even, um, it creates 15 minutes out of our way, but we don't drive through that part of town anymore because we've decided that's best for us. And we take the extra 15 minutes to connect and enjoy a good car ride together. So avoidance can end up disempowering. Not every time. Again, I think it's a case by case basis, especially if the triggering stimulus cannot be dealt with in reality, like how other people look, the fact that your partner has eyes, the fact that your partner remembers the past and has feelings about it. Like those are verities of being a human being and living around other human beings. So if avoidance is our only strategy, we are going to live in a world that gets more and more dangerous and feels more and more out of control. Now, let's talk about approach and what that does to the nervous system. Immediately, it's activating. So if the trauma or the trigger or the annoyance or the distress or the discomfort sends you up into the activation part of the window of tolerance, more activation, you may not have the headroom in it. It may be very, very hard to do approach behavior immediately, if not impossible. So, especially when our baseline is elevated or depressed inherently with triggering situations and content. So, in that like stuck on or stuck off place in the window of tolerance, the effects are amplified. Okay, so it's very energy intensive. It requires complexity of thought and tolerance of emotion to approach. You've seen people who have tried to fight their way out of a trauma trigger, not thinking complexly about it. I'll get mad at this person, or I'll take this person to task, or I'll, put my foot through the computer screen or the TV or whatever. Um, I wouldn't say that that's actually real approach. It's not really dealing with anything. It's exploding. It's acting out. Actually dealing with something in a way that makes sense. It requires complexity of thought and tolerance of emotions. The same hiking trip to climb out of this canyon system, we had a pitch about this steep for about 200 feet, and it was really intense. I don't like heights. My 13-year-old especially doesn't like heights, and he besides me, he was the last one to go up. And my friend that taught me all about Giardia, he's our backcountry guide. He was there helping my son on the rock. I'm, from the bottom kind of coaching. My son trusts this friend more with stuff like that. And he should. This friend actually climbs. Um, and when we were trying to find a path for him up the rocks that would work for him and that he didn't feel overwhelmed by, we had to stop in a few places and say, let's look at options. We had to communicate. What he was feeling in his body is, I just want to get off this rock as fast as possible. And my friend said to him, I can drag you, but I think that's going to hurt in the end. Like I could get you to the top. I think it's better if you can stay on your feet. And so he would ask me, what does it look like from down there? And I would, try to find alternative routes. My friend showed him a route to take as he was going up. But we had to stop and expend a lot of energy in communication and complex thought and making decisions. It's energy expending and risk taking when we think complexly. It's akin to the fight response approaches. So instead of just running away, I'm going to take a step towards, but don't think violence. Think in terms of there's something to protect, preserve, or not interrupting. I'm not going to interrupt this here. It's not worth it. I'm not going to let that happen. So it's this presence of self, and that's where the empowerment comes from. Approach is ultimately empowering if it's not done sloppily. So just because I put my, I roll up my sleeves and put my fighting shoes on, that is not approach. In fact, I would say that's avoidance. That's creating an uproar in order to avoid. But actually approaching with a conversation, a boundary, a vulnerability, like that's where the stuff that avoidance leaves on the table, that's where we get it. Our sense of empowerment, our sense of agency, which is really, really important. I don't think things get stored as trauma in our body and our brain if there's not some removal of agency with it. So in our nervous system, confronted with the same thing, the same trigger, the same data, the same situation, if I'm not doing things that restore my sense of agency, I'm not changing the memory. So healing from trauma, when it comes down to it, is essentially knowing how memory works and dealing with it. So this memory is always encoded with a lack of helplessness, or it's always encoded with helplessness, a lack of agency. So part of our healing that is I have to find my voice, I have to find my boundaries, I have to find good self care. I have to be able to say, no, thank you, not anymore. I have to be able to say, I actually want you to bring more of that on. So in a relationship, you can see how both of us dealing with triggers early on really have to look at developing the push and the pull of avoidance and approach and using those judiciously, learning from essentially what's going to be trial and error. There's things I tried that, that didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. I've got to go back to the drawing table on that. So back to this question from the very beginning. Can you see where I see avoidance in this? I would say it's not a red flag, but I think it's a problem that there's maybe not anyone pushing this person in recovery, or maybe they have a good reason not to. I'd want to hear it. There's not anyone in recovery pushing this person to, hey, I know this is overwhelming and vulnerable and scary, but if you are a grown person with a grown person's body and you're interested in sex, like you have to take responsibility for your own wants and needs. Um, Another couple that I worked with recently, a good example of this kind of like, usually there's a, hey, whatever you're comfortable with approach. Um, Generally, that did well for this couple until it wasn't doing well. And one day, after a lot of thought, he finally said to her, and he was the one who betrayed, he finally said to her, hey, I totally get it, but I feel like I'm carrying way too much of the emotional load in this relationship all by myself. I need you to step up. And she actually said in that, she said, that's the first time in months I could feel my heart space. And she said it helped. So it's not a matter of taking the bull by the horns. It's not a matter of being in control. It's a matter of saying what we want in a relationship, a negotiation around sex, what's going to be healthy for us. I don't think it feels good to start with, oh, whatever you want. It's just going to be about you. Unless your partner would be just as happy with a relationship with the image in the mirror, your partner probably wants to hear from you. Well, what do you think? What do you want? How do you want to rebuild this? What would our relationship be like if sex were working for us in a better way? Um, I would say this is, kind of back to Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them and all the other poker terms that he uses. So there's not a one size fits all approach here. And I think this question is a really good example of how it starts to feel when when facing the really steep pitch, all you get is avoidance from the person that you're working with. I think it also feels terrible when you face that and all you get is approach. Come on, we're going to power through this. We're going to do this. Like it's a bicep and a tricep. It's a push and a pull. You got to be able to use both. But yeah, this question I think really addresses avoidance is not ultimately empowering. I can read it into the asker of the question. I think this person's annoyed with it, frankly, and I think they should be. So yeah, like I said, maybe not red flag, but it's definitely problematic. There needs to be a like push towards this thing that maybe you use sex to blow up your life and your relationship, sure, but it's an unavoidable facet of human life. So you're going to have to step back into the arena and figure out how to be a participant and a carrier of sexuality and not have it blow things up. So that is approach and avoidance.
So I have so if you have two people in a relationship and one is avoiding and one is approaching, like how do you navigate that space? Because I could see the more somebody's trying to approach, or
Yeah.
and it may even feel big,
Yeah.
and I'm going, I just can't do that.
Coupleships have a way of finding homeostasis, even if it's not the best thing for us. So often you'll have that approach and avoid dynamic. In what's it called, emotionally focused therapists, they talk about withdraw and pursue. And it's this forever dynamic of we never get to be close. So when I'm working with a
Mm.
couple and I see that, I will say to them, it seems like both of you are not versed in the approach and the avoidance that's needed to solve this. But making your partner do your homework. Maybe this person is less concerned with conflict. That's great. I think the best thing that can happen here is you could learn from them, but like you need to be able to have, speaking to the partner who's avoiding, you need to be able to have a comfort level with conflict. You can't play that. It's too overwhelming card for me. I'm going to rely on you. Because especially when it's really hard, complex stuff, I don't think anybody in a relationship likes doing part of that work alone. And for the partner who's always approached, and I see this a lot stereotypically with men and women, he's the fixer, and she says, I don't need a fixer, I need someone to listen. Same to the approacher all the time. It seems like your partner may be more comfortable with some discomfort and some kind of waiting. I don't think it's fair to put that all on their shoulders, the patience and the unfolding and the feeling. Maybe you could learn from them, but you need a skill set in that too. You both need to be versed in the approach and the avoid, or this is going to feel too unfair too much of the time. And I would say with a lot of attributes in a relationship that have to do with the day-to-day status of the relationship, the feeling of the relationship, like I just don't think it's really secure. I don't think it bodes well for the future to say, I'm just so glad my partner does that well. I don't have to worry about it. That frame up makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So, okay, we would welcome more questions. This is really interesting, and even the when you're going like, oh, so we're following each other around, but we're never bridging that gap and coming closer.
Well, and we're also triggering when the pursuer pursues, what does the withdrawer do when they're met with conflict? They withdraw.
Run faster.
And when the withdrawer withdraws, what does that trigger in the pursuer? It's so funny. One of our dogs, he's a golden doodle, and his prey drive is hilarious. Like most of the time when I'm hiking with him on the trails and he's off leash, he stays pretty close to me. You get a little rumbling mammal or whatever in the bushes, and like he forgets his name. He doesn't know any of his commands. And I swear, if he could smile, he'd have this big dopey grin on his face, and he'd be like, "This is what we're doing now." So, like, even that pursue withdraw dynamic, it's um, it's a self-supporting cycle that we have to have enough presence of mind as a coupleship to say, okay, this is not helping that we have all this side outsourced to you and all this side outsourced to me. Like, we really have to both throw our hat in the ring with what we want. I can't just wait for you to tell me and I'll react to it. So often I'll have couples switch the dynamic. If there's someone who's always speaking first and I'm seeing the frustration come, I'll ask a question down the middle and I'll say to the less conflict avoidant person, I'll say, not till your partner speaks. And you'll force that change. Or the person who's speaking up, I might say to them, we've heard a lot from you today and I love you, but I want room for your partner to respond. And in that, like whether you're called to self-activate or you're called to just sit and feel for a while, it is a muscle that you have to build. It's something you have to practice. You have to be mindful about. Because again, like we talked about this trauma and disruption in the nervous system, a lot of what we want to do instinctively doesn't really work well for us in the long run. We have to do some things counterintuitive.
So you're talking a lot about, and we've got another question, but I'm going to ask this because you're talking a lot about like we've identified this. This is our, this is the situation we're bringing up. Like this first question, this is the issue, which I think you're right. It probably is pervasive throughout. But so how challenging is it for a couple to identify this is the dance we're doing, and we can see it on a broader basis so that we can look to interrupt that.
I think it's pretty challenging because I don't know about you all, but when you think about like the first relationships you got in, like I was so relieved when the Twitter patient took over and I was like, I don't care what's really happening here. Like this feels great. And I think a lot of us can coast on that for a bit. And then when you start living together, when you spend a lot of time together and you see things that you have feelings and responses to, or you have thoughts about, it can almost feel like a betrayal of the initial idea. But
Mm.
remember that like even the neurobiology of bonding in the first 7 years of a relationship, it's a whole different suite of neurotransmitters than it is after about 7 years. So in the beginning, it's a lot about horniness and romance and sex and all that stuff that is admittedly just so fun to be able to experience. But later on, what's actually produced in the body and the brain in a relationship that continues is more like oxytocin, vasopressin, which are bonding, friendship. They're a little more low and slow. So like literally the substance of your relationship changes with time, and your skill set and your ability to work and your willingness to work has to change too. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in that original idea. Shouldn't this be easy? Shouldn't it be fun? And I would say, yeah, it should be and it can be, but only by design. If you had it easy and fun in the beginning, you got lucky. If you want it easy and fun, you have to design it that way. That means you have to talk about it, you have to think about it, you have to look at yourselves in the mirror.
Interesting too, because I'm thinking like I don't feel the same anymore. And I'm like, oh, like, you're saying you literally don't feel the same because the hormone levels are different.
Yeah, neurologically, yeah, it makes sense. You may be less entranced by this person's body because maybe both of like maybe over time your testosterone levels have dropped. Your partner may be premenopause and like yeah, we're not feeling sexy and spry and youthful at that point. But a relationship that's really been about companionship will have a ton else to draw on that does keep the fires of passion alive, which is our shared history, the things we've been through together. I love your brain. I like how your mind works. Um, yeah.
Okay, so the next one on the same subject as healthy sex, my sex addict husband acted out with porn stars, call girls, and transsexuals. This relationship was toxic. How do I know if he now has a new view of his relationship to sex? He is about 2 years sober and working with a CSAT.
I'm going to put this in the approach bucket. Ask him. Like, this is some of that work that I think has to be done in relationship therapy. Like, we actually have to look at each other and say, okay, you've been working on yourself. I've been working on myself. We expect there to be different things. Let's open it up. Let's see where things lie. And I think it's important in these conversations that it's not necessarily a right answer we're looking for. I think it's more like, I want to know if you're coming from an embodied, complete place. I want to know if you're coming from a thought out and a connected place. Because to have a specific answer, again, that would be some of the avoidance piece. I want everything to be the way that I want it. I want nothing to change. And so I'm looking for this. And if that's really what's best for you, like you can own that. And you can say there's really only like these three beliefs about sex that are going to work and be compatible with me. But then it's not your partner's fault when they don't believe those three things. It's a matter of incompatibility stated. We knew it wasn't going to work out if it's not this. So I would say the best way to know if there's a new view or to get to know that new view is you have to talk about it.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I was like, and I was thinking, if there's a quick reactionary, oh yeah, it's all different, it's all better, like that would be not the conversation again.
I've never seen that build confidence. I was like, oh yeah,
No.
totally. I've worked behind the scenes for 2 years and now it's everything that you ever wanted.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never seen that produce safety. Even, we say good, solid recovery from this is like a 5 to 8 year, 5 to 7 year process. This latter stuff about attitudes about sex, sexuality, even awareness of what my behavior meant before, like that takes time to unfold. And again, I've seen couples who have had very earnest conversations about what's changing and what they're learning and have those earnest conversations. Well, it's upsetting to me that like this piece still feels like that. And I've seen that greeted with ownership and accountability, and like the relationship can get stronger as a result of that. It has very little, I always tell couples, the content of what you're talking about does not matter as much as the manner in which you're talking about it. So if you want to know if your partner's views have changed, it's not just asking about what are your views, it's looking at like when the topic comes up, when we disagree, what do you do? When you feel threatened, what do you do? Is there room for two different people here? Is there room for continued work?
And I would hope, that you're also seeing, you know, because in my view, recovery is we learn to integrate this stuff into all areas of our life. It's not
Mhm.
just like the recovery work and sex, it's like he's showing up differently, the conversation, how he's interacting with people, that he's recognizing that people are human beings with, and real people and not just there for his, a pleasure or service or what, they're not just for him, so
Mhm.
hopefully you're starting to see some of those actions that would also correlate with the recovery work that he's doing, as part of it. But I'm a big, like we get lots of questions on these where it's like, yeah, have you had the conversation? It's this is such intimate work, to be on a recovery path. And it feels like communication is one of the biggest hurdles. And I know that there's fear around like, what if he says, yeah, or what if she gets upset? Yes, but that's part of the working through things and being closer rather than, as John was showing, we're running a parallel, infinite loop. Okay, the next one, John. I have seen that in my marriage. We switch places in this. I am the betrayed partner 2.6 years, I think it's years, past discovery, no disclosure. Maybe it's months. I don't know. Usually he is the avoider and I'm the approacher. I have seen it swap though when he finally decides to approach and tell me something transparently and honestly about the past or in the present using his tools. I want to avoid hearing it because I know it will hurt. Then he avoids telling me again and I start wanting the information again. I think if he finished the disclosure and we went through, oh, two, yeah, yeah, oh, it's 2.6 years. I wish it was months. So thanks for clarifying. I think if he finished the disclosure and we went through that, this would be a lot easier for us and we wouldn't avoid it as much.
Um, so here's where my mind goes. Speaking of one of those images, I have two little kids, an almost 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, who like shoes is just not what you wear ever, and especially not outside. And right now, our front yard is just a dirt patch. We're redoing it to be water wise. It's a lot of work you have to put into making something that's low maintenance, like a relationship. um, so it's not a place that's real conducive to no shoes. They also have some like Strider bikes and wiggle cars that they love to race up and down the driveway. And what do they break with? They break with their little feet. And so we have a lot, like almost on a daily basis, we have scraped toes that the scrape is very dirty or they've stepped on something and like it has to get cleaned up. And part of what we're working on right now is the place for medically necessary pain. When I clean a wound, now I don't use like straight rubbing alcohol, but sometimes soap and water stings. Sometimes hydrogen peroxide stings. So we talk a lot about this. Like, yeah, there's going to be this painful part, but we're doing that for this specific reason. We need to get the scratch clean, and then we're going to put this stuff on it, this antibiotic ointment. That's going to make it feel a lot better. There's some pain reliever in this one. Like, don't worry, the pain relief is coming. This kind of transparency and honesty and disclosure, I think, is the same thing. Like, of course, the truth hurts. That's why everybody has avoided it up to this point. I would say in coupleships where we have undeniably said the truth is the most important thing we can give to each other, and we both believe it and we both do it. Secrets have a hard time lasting for a really, really long time. That's why we make that policy. So yeah, there's a piece here I would say to both of you that like, yeah, I don't think it's quite shouldering the load when it comes to, okay, we're gonna do the approach thing. Oh wait, but it's gonna hurt. Oh, I don't want to hear it. I think we have to ask ourselves, like, what's the medically necessary pain? What would I rather have, comfort or the truth? Like these are the types of questions we have to be asking ourselves when it comes to our nervous system, saying just run, just run, just run, it's gonna hurt. And that's where I would say that like practice that approach muscle. I said in the lecture part, approach takes more energy. There's more risk. So that's part of what comes with the territory. And again, there's that complexity of thought. I don't ever like to get a wound cleaned. It's so unpleasant, but I know what it's in service of and I know what the next step is. And, I don't ever start cleaning one of my kids' wounds without the Band-Aid and the antiseptic or the antibiotic ointment just right there. So it's as soon as this hurt can be over with, we're calming, we're soothing, like we're going to make it all okay.
And I'm curious about you know, who's doing the avoidance on the formal therapeutic disclosure. So I, I cannot think off the top of my head of qualified professionals that would want it to be delayed that long. So I'm curious about that, and maybe it's avoidance of working with qualified professionals. I don't know, but yeah, this that's a difficult pattern for both of you, and so yeah, I'm voting. Get the band-aids out, call the professionals, schedule the formal therapeutic
Yeah.
disclosure, have the support. Then you both have the support. The band-aids and antibiotic cream are right there.
I've
It will help.
I've almost never had a formal therapeutic disclosure happen according to the schedule we set up initially. And I'm fine with that, but I think what putting the date on the calendar does is it says to both parties, and even to me as a therapist, like, no, we're serious about this. This has to happen. And so we start driving towards it. And yeah, if there's barriers we encounter along the way, we'll deal with them. But once I set one date with couples, I don't say, okay, we're suspending this. I say, okay, let's push it out another month. You know the work that you need to do. You know the work that you need to do. So here's the day that it's going to happen, and we'll check in 2 weeks before and see where we're at.
Does the avoidance approach work with people my SA husband acted out with, have yet to approach them, but instead hide when I see them in community?
You know, I don't quite understand what the question is there, so I'm gonna put some editorial license on here. Like, so for example, I know there's people he's acted out with in the community. Should I approach them to master my fear? I think you that there's some of that complexity of thought. I think you really have to talk that through with a therapist and support people. I have seen some partners regain some of their dignity and empowerment going up to the acting out partner where that person is they're regulated, they know what they're doing, and they say, listen, I want you to put a face with the person. I'm the person that got hurt in this. And that's all that they've needed to say. But I think that whole, like, if I'm afraid I ought to go master my fear, I think that's a little short-sighted. It's a little more complex than that. So that idea, like, talk about the upsides and the downsides. And maybe if it's even looking at skills for, instead of avoiding this place because I saw this person there, and then my you know my range that I can roam on is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and I'm feeling more like a prisoner in my own life. Maybe it's working on, if I do see this person in public, what will I do? I've worked with partners who've been trained on that, and we've talked about, like, make sure you stand up straight, put your head up high. You don't have to approach or avoid this person. You might just remind yourself why you're there and go about your business. Maybe it helps to reclaim that space and say, I'm going to pretend like you don't exist. You're not going to impede me. I'm not going to allow you to take this from me as well. Tammy, is there anything else you read in that
No,
question?
well, yeah, I think that that's all really helpful because there are some that want to go like rage at, but I also hear this is like I want to hide, and unfortunately I know too many partners that, like John just mentioned, like the world got really small because the community isn't safe because it's been marred by the acting out behavior or the fear of, well, that might be another person, that person's in his arousal template, or like, I don't know all the information. So at some point, and it's challenging, but to own, this is my community and I'm going to be part of it. I have, just like John said, why am I here? I have a reason I'm here. I'm grocery shopping or whatever, and I'm going to go about my business and hold my head up high, and you know a- and like in 12 step, we talk about fake it till you make it, and that came to mind with this is like, you may be, quivering on the inside, but, practicing that and doing, okay, I made it to the grocery store and it's okay. But, and it's really hard, when it's, within a community and a small community and you see people, I think that is very, very difficult. I think also brains can go to it's everywhere and everybody. And, so, what is the reality? And for sometimes it's like, I am safe in this moment. I am going to go about my business. Like all of those things, just like what is in the present right now,
Mhm.
and how do I act in a way that isn't aligned with my values, that I am, that I'm not, you know, creating a scene or doing whatever I like that I'm doing what I will feel good about, for the long haul.
There's a piece of enmeshment work that comes up for me here because I see with the enmeshed folks that I work with, like even in their attempt to heal or avoid, their mother can still be the center of their life,
Mhm,
which is I'm not going to do things like you, or
mhm.
I'm not going to like that because you like that. And that I would say is again, it's understandable where that reflex comes from, but it's not really thought through. Like, what if there are things that your mother introduced to you, or what if there are places that are really special to you and they were tainted by addiction and acting out? Like, do you have the option to say, I'm reclaiming this? And maybe it's not going to be about us anymore. Maybe it'll be about me and my love for this. I'm not going to let you take this from me. And so it's really removing that center tent pole, I think, is another way to talk about our topic today. The trauma and the sensation and the feeling being the thing we build our life by. When we can approach or we can avoid consciously, deliberately, then we start to reconfigure the engineering, and this thing that happened or this thing I'm afraid of is not what calls the shots. It's me. I'm putting myself back at the center of my life.
And another thing, we talk about bookending, and this is usually for the betraying partner, the addict partner, that, like if I'm going to do something, I'm going to contact my sponsor or peer support before. I'm going to go to the place that could be a problem. And then, I'm going to have them on, I'm going to text or call if I need to, but otherwise I'm going to bookend and contact afterwards. And I'm thinking, with these, it may be, for a partner to have your circle of friends and go like, this is a challenging thing for me to do. I'm going to text you or call you before. I'm going to text you or
Mm-hmm.
call you afterwards. I just want to know that someone is going to be thinking about me while I'm going through this, and that I have that lifeline of support, from that standpoint as well. So, and this is all complicated and messy, and there's no easy, and even, with time frames and people doing the right work, it doesn't make it all better. And, like this is a lifelong journey, and life is a lifelong journey. And so, this just happens to be the path that we're on, for recovery and betrayal and all of those things. So, but that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, and hopefully you're thinking of some ways that you can navigate that. So the next one, John, my therapist never recommended a formal disclosure. I don't know what that was. Oh, I didn't know what that was. I'm a betrayed partner, and my dismissive avoidant partner gave me a trickle truth about his pornography issue. What is the best approach to overcome trickle truth? That's another great question because we hear this a lot too.
Yeah. The spirit of it is knock it off, give it all to me in one setting. Like, I'm sorry I'm laughing about this. Um, let's face it like adults, and let's get the truth on the table. Now, operationally in a coupleship, why that is important is because I think the biggest betrayal is there was information that was kept from you that could have empowered you to make better choices for your health and well-being in the relationship. And that's a big deal with adults, where it should be adults choosing and consenting to have a relationship. So conceptually, it's just as simple as this ritual of disclosure puts absolute truth on the table. You tell me everything that you've done. I tell you what I feel about it, how it's impacted me, and we put empathy and recognition as a big part of our relationship to deal with this. So yeah, I think the best way is you search your heart and you say, is this something that I need? And if it's a need, like food, like water, I'm going to say I'm insisted. I'm insisting on this. You need to tell me the truth. Work with someone who can support you in that, and let's do it. Let's put all these questions and fear in our rearview mirror.
And so a couple of things on this. My therapist never recommended a formal disclosure. It is why we recommend professionals who are trained in this work. It is very specific. Dr. Rob does a peer case consultation group on Tuesdays for professionals, and the topic that comes up the most is formal therapeutic disclosure. And notice it's not formal disclosure, it's formal therapeutic disclosure. It's part of the process that it is a therapeutic process if it's done well. So I am wondering if like i- if your therapist is CSAT, CPTT, or APSATs trained, they are trained in some of this, and advocate for that. The other thing is I don't hear what your betraying partner, who is your betraying partner, because again, having a qualified therapist that would be coming up now. If it's an dismissive avoidant partner, the therapist may be recommending it with your betraying partner, and he may be going, yeah, I'm just going to avoid telling my partner about this. So this, we talk about conjoint, therapy, having both of your therapists and both of you, and having a discussion about, what would be the benefits, what would be the time frame, all of those things for a formal therapeutic disclosure, what's necessary between now and, setting a date for this. And really, it is from my opinion, the betrayed partner's decision. If you want a formal therapeutic disclosure, that not every partner does, and I respect that. There can be reasons. So that would be, but I'm wondering if you would have both of your therapists, and hopefully both trained. If you don't, TAMI@seekingintegrity.com, and tell me where you're located, because I make probably 100 referrals a week on that topic. Okay. Contracted an STI from my SA husband that began to change my cervical cells. I just had my 1 year recheck and test came back abnormal again. Oh man, having completely avoided sex with him again. He feels unsafe, although he has been working really hard towards recovery 18 months. How do I work towards approach again?
So I would actually expand the approach not just towards your spouse, but I would also wonder with this STI, how versed are you in its course, prevalence, resurgence? Like, do you know what you have right now and how it tends to play out? It's not uncommon for an STI, even if there's not reinfection, to be like, herpes is a good example. Once you get herpes, you just have it, and it can resurge. So the approach, have you approached your body and what's going on with it and learned everything you can about what you're dealing with so that you can understand what is to be expected with this and what doesn't track, if that makes sense. Um, the other part is, like I said, approach takes a lot of energy. And I think, especially when it comes to sex, our bodies have this knack for, like, if sex has been a harbinger or a carrier of danger or unsafety, our bodies have a way of clamping up around it. And I actually think initially it's probably important to honor that. Probably important to almost like saying to your body, thank you so much for taking this option off the table because I don't feel safe. And I think it's like, I would call it a tactical retreat. I'm stopping and I'm avoiding to create some space that I can kind of recollect myself and I can figure some things out. So when you say he feels unsafe, this might be a time where you ask your partner to get tested again and see, are you carrying something that's any different than what we knew about before? Um, you might ask your partner to engage with you in some of those conversations and how hard it is to live with something that he gave to you that wasn't your choice. And you might ask for that, I need you to listen. I know there's maybe not a lot that either of us can do about this, but what you can give me is support and empathy and, a shoulder to cry on because this is really hard. And it's so, especially when we're talking about sexual trauma, we're not talking like exposure therapy approach. We're talking about like the clinical term is affectively tolerable doses. We're talking about pieces that make sense and pieces that you can tolerate approaching. Approach is not like, I don't know, shooting a gallon of water with a shotgun. Like, we're not looking to obliterate it. We're just looking for like one step at a time, regaining some of that room, some of that confidence, some of that agency, some of that ability. But yeah, like triggers around your body and sex, they clamp down and they get serious for a reason. So I would definitely start with honoring that part of you. It's like, nope, I'm shut down, doesn't feel safe. Thank it for showing up and helping you. And then, yeah, the tactical retreat. Okay, what do I want to do with this information? Let me reorient to what my world is right now. What kind of support, care, medicine do I need?
And I'm thinking, if you've tactically retreated, when you're ready to re-engage, then there's all kinds of things, like uh, sensate focused touch, which is not about
Mhm.
sex, but like maybe you're ready just to hold hands. Okay, well,
Mhm.
so finding a path forward from that. But I really honor the listen to your body, and if it's saying and that's okay for where you are right now, and if it's something that you are ready to pursue, your body will, let you know that too. So I think it's really easy for partners to override,
Yeah.
and just go, no, we need to do, otherwise he's going to go have sex with somebody, whatever, which is not true. But, so I think it's really important to, to pay attention. I am so sorry though. I mean, and this is unfortunately a really common theme, in the empowered women's retreats, that we have. One of the questions, we were just, the kind of getting to know you, and somebody threw out, how many have, contracted, STIs, and that you'd be amazed at, like it was like 2/3, I think, of people had, had that as an. So here's another public service announcement. If you're a betrayed partner and you haven't gotten tested, please. So, okay, we're out of time. Thanks, everyone. Great questions.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John. Great topic.